The breaking point. The Navori didn't understand tears. Captain Alara Chen stood at the viewport of the diplomatic vessel Harmony, watching the crystalline structures of Navori Prime glitter beneath them. Beautiful and deadly, like everything in this sector. Her reflection showed a woman who had spent too many years trying to forge peace with a species that viewed emotion as weakness. "Captain, we're receiving the landing coordinates now," Lieutenant Thomas Riley said, his voice carrying that familiar warmth that had kept her sane through 3 years of negotiations. More than her communications officer, he was her closest friend on this mission that had stretched far beyond its original timeline. "Acknowledged," she replied, straightening her formal diplomatic uniform. "Prepare the delegation. We make history today." Thomas smiled, the corners of his eyes crinkling. One way or another, we always do. The Navori collective had been expanding aggressively for decades, their technological prowess nearly matching humanity's despite their relatively recent ascension to space. They were methodical, calculating, and utterly pragmatic. Their physical form, tall, angular bodies with iridescent exoskeletons and 4 manipulating limbs, mirrored their rigid worldview. After years of border skirmishes and mounting tensions, this summit was humanity's best hope for lasting peace. Alara had staked her career on the belief that understanding could prevail. "Final checks complete," Thomas announced as the ship began its descent. "Ambassador Reyes is ready with the treaty provisions." Alara nodded, her hand brushing against the small holoprojector in her pocket. It contained images of her family back on Earth, her aging parents, her sister's newborn. Reminders of why this mission mattered beyond political calculations. Let's not keep our hosts waiting. The landing was smooth, the reception formal. Supreme Commander Vexnor greeted them personally, towering nearly 7 feet tall, his exoskeleton shimmering with the pale blue markings of Navori leadership. "Captain Chen," he intoned, mandibles clicking slightly, "we welcome the human delegation to our homeworld. May our discussions be productive." Productive. Always their highest praise. Alara had learned to translate their sparse language over the years to read meaning in the subtle shifts of their crystalline eyes. "Commander Vexenor, we are honored by your welcome," she replied with a formal bow. "We come seeking lasting harmony between our peoples." The delegation moved through the arching corridors of the summit hall, a transparent dome showcasing the 3 moons of Navori Prime overhead. Security was present but unobtrusive. A dozen Navori guards with ceremonial staffs that Alara knew concealed powerful energy weapons. Protocol dictated 12 humans would attend: Alara, Ambassador Reyes, Thomas, and 9 other specialists. The Navori matched this number precisely, their penchant for symmetry evident in every arrangement. The first 3 hours proceeded exactly as planned. Treaty provisions were discussed, border agreements tentatively approved, trade routes negotiated. Alara found herself almost relaxing as Vexnor seemed genuinely engaged with Ambassador Reyes's proposals. Then everything changed in an instant. The subtle vibration that ran through the floor was Alara's only warning. Years of military training before her diplomatic assignment had her reaching for Thomas's arm, even before conscious thought registered the danger. "Down!" she shouted. But it was already too late. The transparent dome above shattered inward, in a cascade of deadly shards. Not an accident, a precisely calculated attack. Simultaneously, the ceremonial staffs of the guards transformed, energy weapons deploying with practiced efficiency. Ambassador Reyes fell first, a burning hole where his heart had been. 3 other delegation members dropped in the first volley. "Betrayal," Thomas shouted, pushing Alara toward a structural column as chaos erupted. His body jerked suddenly, his eyes widening in shock as an energy pulse caught him squarely in the back. Time seemed to slow as Alara watched her friend fall. His hand reached toward her, mouth forming words she couldn't hear through the roaring in her ears. The remaining humans fought back with whatever they had, service pistols, improvised weapons, but they were outmatched. Alara dragged Thomas behind the column, her hands desperately trying to stem the bleeding from a wound too catastrophic for survival. "Why?" he gasped, blood bubbling at his lips. "We were so close." Save your strength, she ordered, her captain's voice steady despite the screaming inside her mind. His fingers clutched hers with surprising strength. Promise me, he whispered. Promise me they'll remember this day. Not as the day we failed, but as the day they made their worst mistake. Around them, the sounds of struggle diminished as her people fell. Alara felt something break inside her, not her resolve, but the diplomatic restraint she had cultivated for years. I promise, she said, and meant it with every fiber of her being. Thomas's eyes held hers for one more moment before the light in. Them faded. Alara gently closed his eyelids, her hand coming away smeared with his blood. Supreme Commander Vexnor approached, flanked by guards, his posture radiating not triumph but methodical satisfaction. A task completed efficiently. This unfortunate action was necessary, he stated, as if explaining a mathematical equation. Our council calculated that humans cannot be trusted with equal partnership. Your emotions make you unpredictable. Your concept of peace is inconsistent. You will serve the collective better as a subjugated species. Alara stood slowly, her hands raised in apparent surrender. The blood, Thomas's blood, dried on her fingertips as she faced the architect of this slaughter. You've studied our history, she said, her voice unnaturally calm. You've analyzed our biology, our politics, our warfare. Extensively, Vexnor agreed. Your species has been thoroughly evaluated. Then you've made a catastrophic error in your analysis. Something in her tone made Vexnor pause, his head tilting slightly in the Navori expression of reassessment. Explain. Alara felt a single tear track down her cheek. Not from fear, not from defeat, but from a grief so profound it had transformed into something else entirely. A cold fury that seemed to crystallize her from within. You mistook our capacity for emotion as weakness, she said, the tear hanging for a moment at her jawline before falling, when in reality it's the source of our greatest strength. The tear splashed onto the polished floor between them. Vexnor's compound eyes followed its path with academic curiosity. Fascinating. The liquid emotional response. We have observed this phenomenon. But you never understood it, Alara said. In one fluid motion, she withdrew Thomas's concealed sidearm from his body and fired, not at Vexnor, at the environmental control panel on the wall behind him. Alarms blared as atmospheric pressure fluctuated violently. The remaining Navori guards stumbled, their exoskeletons highly sensitive to pressure changes. Alara had studied their physiology as thoroughly as they had studied humans. She moved with cold precision, each shot finding its mark as she cleared a path to the communication console. 3 guards fell before they could recover. 2 more tried to flank her, but their movements were sluggish in the destabilized atmosphere. Alara's fingers flew across the alien interface, overriding security protocols using access codes she had memorized during 3 years of preparation, not for betrayal, but for emergency extraction. Now those contingencies served a different purpose. What are you doing? Vexnor demanded, struggling to maintain his balance as the room's environmental systems continued their chaotic fluctuations. Alara didn't answer immediately. Her focus remained on the console as she established a direct channel to the orbiting human ships, vessels that would now receive no diplomatic all-clear signal. I'm showing you what happens when you make a human cry, she finally said, looking up from her work. When you extinguish someone they loved. The message she sent was, brief, summit betrayed, delegation executed, Black Protocol authorized. In the archives of human military history, Black Protocol had been established after the early colonial wars, a measure of last resort when diplomacy had not just failed, but been violently rejected. It authorized immediate and overwhelming force, bypassing standard chains of command. Outside, the sky began to glow as human warships moved into attack formation. You should have killed me first, Alara told Vexnor, who now stared at her with something approaching comprehension. Because now I have nothing left to lose. The first orbital strikes hit with precision, targeting Navori military installations, surrounding the capital. Not indiscriminate destruction. Alara wasn't seeking genocide. but the systematic dismantling of the collective's ability to extend this betrayal further. She advanced on Vexnor, who had finally drawn his own weapon. "You're alone," he stated. "One human cannot—" "I'm not alone," Ilara cut him off. "I carry the weight of every human you've killed today, and that makes me more dangerous than your analysts could ever calculate." As if to punctuate her statement, the ground shook with another series of strikes. Through the shattered dome, Navori defensive batteries answered with plasma bursts that illuminated the sky in eerie purple hues. "You've initiated a war you cannot win," Vexnor said, but uncertainty had crept into his usually modulated voice. "This isn't war," Ilara replied coldly. "This is consequence." She moved toward the exit, keeping her weapon trained on the Navori commander. From the corridor came the sounds of combat. Not all humans had been in the summit chamber when the betrayal unfolded. The ship's security detail was fighting back. "Captain Chen," a voice called. Lieutenant Commander Jackson appeared at the doorway, armor scorched but intact. "We've secured a path to the extraction point. The retribution is providing cover fire." Ilara nodded, backing away from Vexnor. "We're leaving, but we'll be back." "Your emotional response is illogical," Vexnor called after her. "Vengeance will not resurrect your dead." Ilara paused at the threshold, her eyes meeting the alien's compound gaze one final time. "That's where you're wrong, Commander," she said, quietly. "In human history, the dead have always been our most powerful allies. They fuel something in us that your kind will never comprehend." As she disappeared down the corridor with her surviving crew, Vexnor turned to the view screen that showed the human fleet descending upon the Navori capital. For the first time in his long military career, Supreme Commander Vexnor felt something unfamiliar ripple through his logical mind: doubt. He had watched a human cry, and now he would witness the consequences of failing to understand what that tear truly meant. Reckoning. "They're coming back." The words hung in the air of the Navori High Council chamber, their impact rendering the usual methodical debate process momentarily silent. 3 days had passed since the failed summit and the subsequent human assault on Navori Prime's military installations. Supreme Commander Vexnor stood before the semicircular arrangement of the 9 counselors, their exoskeletons, bearing the deep purple markings of the highest caste. He had spent those 3 days analyzing the tactical response, calculating probabilities, and reassessing everything the collective thought they knew about humans. "Elaborate," First Counselor Zivra finally said, her mandibles clicking in the subtle rhythm that indicated deep concern. "The human fleet has regrouped at the edge of the Tannhauser Reach," Vexnor reported. "They've been joined by 3 battle carriers from their core systems. Intelligence suggests Captain Chen is now directing their military response." "A diplomat commanding military forces?" Third Counselor Mexpar's tone carried disbelief. "This contradicts all previous human operational patterns." "That is precisely my point," Vexnor replied. "Our understanding of human behavior was fundamentally flawed. We interpreted their emotional capacity as a strategic weakness to exploit. Instead, it appears to function as an adaptive catalyst." The council chamber's curved walls displayed tactical projections of human fleet movements. The precision of their formations contradicted all predictive models the Navori had constructed. "The human response lacks the disorganization we anticipated following leadership decapitation," Vexnor continued. "Instead, they have coalesced around a singular purpose with remarkable efficiency." Second Counselor Trelvan, the eldest of the 9 and a veteran of the earliest encounters with humankind, leaned forward. "You speak of the human Chen specifically. Explain your assessment." Vexnor touched his control panel, bringing up footage from the summit chamber. The image froze on Captain Ilara Chen's face, the moment when the tear had fallen. "I witnessed a physiological response we had categorized as indicating submission or defeat," he said, mandibles tightening in what passed for discomfort among his kind. "I now believe we fundamentally misinterpreted its significance." The council studied the image with collective intensity. A liquid secretion. "Their grief response," Zivra noted clinically. "Not merely grief," Vexnor corrected. "A transformation point." When Chen shed this tear, she did not become weaker. She became something else entirely. Something our predictive models failed to anticipate. Outside the council chamber, the capital city was still recovering from the precision strikes. Humans had targeted military and governmental infrastructure with surgical accuracy, deliberately avoiding civilian centers, not from weakness, but from a calculated message. We could destroy everything, but we are choosing not to. Yet. What do you propose? Zivra asked after a lengthy silence. Reassessment, Vexnor said immediately. Our current course was predicated on a fundamental misunderstanding of human psychology. We need to. A proximity alert cut him off. The chamber's displays shifted automatically to orbital views, where a single human vessel had appeared, seemingly out of nowhere, directly above the capital. Impossible, Mexpar hissed. Our sensor grid would have detected approach, but the evidence hovered before them, the Harmony. The same diplomatic vessel that had brought the human delegation days earlier, now repurposed. A communication request flashed across the screens. After a moment of collective hesitation, Zivra nodded. Accept transmission. Captain Ilara Chen's face appeared on the central display. Gone was the diplomatic uniform, replaced by the midnight blue of the United Earth Command. The insignia on her collar indicated a field promotion to Commodore. Navori High Council, she began without preamble, her voice carrying a calm that seemed more terrifying than rage. I am here to deliver terms. Terms? Trelvon repeated, compound eyes narrowing. You have no positional advantage from which to dictate terms. A smile touched Ilara's lips that never reached her eyes. Your assessment continues to be flawed, Counselor. While we're having this conversation, 23 critical nodes in your planetary defense grid have been compromised by dormant protocols installed during our 3 years of peaceful negotiations. On cue, the chamber's tactical displays confirmed. Her statement as defense stations systematically went offline across the planet. That's impossible, Mexipar objected. Our systems are isolated from. Your third fleet is currently engaging what they believe to be human warships in the Hermes sector, Ilara continued as if uninterrupted. They are, in fact, fighting automated decoys, while our actual strike force moves into position behind Navori Prime's second moon. Vexnor quickly verified this information, mandibles clicking rapidly in the Navori expression of alarm. How? He demanded. Ilara's gaze found him on the council floor. You studied our history of warfare but missed its most important lesson. Humans have always excelled at deception, especially when motivated by loss. She leaned closer to the camera. 3 years I spent trying to build a genuine peace between our species. 3 years believing cooperation was possible. You answered that good faith with betrayal and the execution of my people. The coldness in her voice sent a ripple of uncharacteristic disquiet through the council chamber. What are your terms? Zivra finally asked, pragmatism overriding pride. Unconditional withdrawal from all contested territories. Reparations for the families of the murdered delegation members, and the architects of the betrayal remanded to human custody for trial. Trelvon's exoskeleton flushed with the dark copper of indignation. These terms are unacceptable. The collective does not surrender. This isn't a request for surrender, Ilara corrected. It's an opportunity to avoid extinction. The word hung in the air, heavy with implication. You would not eliminate an entire species, Zivra stated, though uncertainty threaded through her usually confident tone. Human ethical frameworks prohibit such actions. Our ethical frameworks are predicated on reciprocity, Ilara replied. You've demonstrated yourselves incapable of honoring agreements. That changes the calculation. On the displays around the BUR chamber, new alerts appeared as human vessels emerged from FTL jumps throughout the system, far more than Navori intelligence had accounted for. You have 1 hour to provide your answer, Ilara said. I suggest you use it wisely. The transmission ended, leaving the council in uncharacteristic disarray. She's bluffing, Mexpar insisted. Humans lack the resolve for systematic extermination. Their historical records show consistent patterns of hesitation when faced with total war scenarios. Vexnor stepped forward again. Counselors, I must strongly advise against testing this assessment. Explain, Zivra commanded. I have reviewed all available data on human conflict resolution, he said. Their behavior follows predictable patterns, until it doesn't. The variable we fail to account for is what humans call a breaking point. When this threshold is crossed, their behavioral parameters shift dramatically. He brought up the image of the tear again. This was Chen's breaking point. What follows adheres to different rules than all previous interactions. I believe she is entirely capable of executing the implied threat. A heavy silence settled over the chamber. The Navori collective had risen to prominence through careful calculation, meticulous planning, and the clinical application of force when necessary. Emotion was seen as evolutionary baggage, to be managed and minimized. The idea that it could be harnessed as a strategic asset was alien to their worldview. First Counselor, Vexnor pressed, our analysis failed because we observed human grief and interpreted it as weakness. We were wrong. When they grieve, they do not become less. They transform. After what seemed an eternity, Zivra rose. Prepare a response accepting the human terms, she announced, and begin compiling all information on human emotional responses for comprehensive review. We must understand what we are dealing with. 20 minutes later, Ilara received the Navori acceptance of terms. Victory should have felt triumphant, but as she stood on the bridge of the harmony, all she felt was hollow. Thomas was still dead. So were Ambassador Reyes and the others. No tactical victory could change that reality. Lieutenant Commander Jackson approached cautiously. Orders, Commodore? Maintain battle readiness until the withdrawal is confirmed, she replied, and prepare a shuttle. I'm going down to the surface. Ma'am? Jackson's concern was evident. After what they did, Ilara turned to face her officer, and the crew fell silent at the expression they saw there. Not anger anymore, but something more complex. They need to understand, she said quietly. Not just intellectually, but viscerally. What it means to face humanity when we've been pushed beyond endurance. The shuttle landed at the same port where the diplomatic mission had arrived just days earlier. This time there was no ceremonial reception, only a contingent of Navori officials led by Supreme Commander Vexnor and First Counselor Zivra. Ilara walked down the ramp alone, unarmed but projecting an authority that transcended physical weapons. Commander Vexnor, she acknowledged with a curt nod. First Counselor. Commodore Chen, Zivra responded formally. The collective has transmitted acceptance of all terms. Implementation has begun. I'm not here about the terms, Ilara said. I'm here to make sure you understand why this happened. Vexnor's head tilted slightly. Clarify. Ilara reached into her pocket and withdrew a small holographic projector. When activated, it displayed images of the fallen delegation members, not as corpses, but as they had lived. Thomas laughing during off-duty hours. Ambassador Reyes with his family. Specialists sharing meals, working, living. You saw humans as variables in an equation, she said, her voice steady. You calculated our response based on force deployment, resource allocation, strategic objectives, but you missed the critical factor. The holographic images cycled through moments of human connection, the very thing the Navori had dismissed as irrelevant sentimentality. When you killed them, you didn't just eliminate tactical assets, Ilara continued. You severed bonds. You created absence where there was presence. You thought our grief would paralyze us. Instead, it transformed us. Zivra studied the images with new attention. The emotional connection serves as a force multiplier, she observed clinically. It's more than that, Ilara corrected. It's the foundation of everything we build, our cities, our ships, our civilization itself. We advance not despite our emotional capacity, but because of it. She deactivated the projector, returning it to her pocket. You saw me cry and thought you were witnessing weakness, she said, looking directly at Vexnor. What you actually saw was a warning, a signal that boundaries had been crossed from which there was no return. Understanding seemed to dawn in Vexnor's compound eyes. Not complete, perhaps, but the beginning of comprehension. Your emotion became purpose, he said slowly. Yes. And that's what you need to remember, long after our fleets have withdrawn, and the terms of this agreement have been fulfilled. The next time you consider betrayal, remember what happened when you made one human cry. Alara turned to leave, then paused. Supreme Commander, a question. Proceed, Vexnor responded. Does your species have an equivalent? Some experience that transforms your understanding so fundamentally that everything afterward is different? Vexnor considered this for a long moment. Perhaps what transpired here, he finally answered. We will study human tears with greater attention in the future. Study them, Ilara advised as she walked back toward her shuttle. But pray you never cause them again. As her shuttle ascended back to orbit, Ilara looked down at the crystalline spires of the Navori capital, still standing despite humanity's capacity to reduce them to rubble. That restraint, she knew, was not weakness, but strength, the ability to channel grief into purpose rather than blind destruction. Thomas would have approved of that distinction. In the coming weeks, the Navori collective meticulously honored every aspect of the agreement. Their withdrawal from contested territories was executed with their characteristic precision. Reparations were calculated and delivered without complaint. Those responsible for orchestrating the betrayal were surrendered for trial under human justice systems. But the most significant change was less tangible. Throughout Navori space, a new understanding began to take root, a respect born not of admiration but of a kind of awe. They had witnessed something their analytical minds had failed to predict, the power of human emotion not as weakness, but as catalyst. In the archives of the collective, a new tactical principle was established, studied by every Navori strategist and commander. It was named simply the Tear Protocol. Its core lesson was elegantly succinct. When a human cries, do not mistake it for surrender. It is the moment when everything changes. In the grand calculus of the universe, there exists no force more terrifying than a species that can transform grief into purpose. We mistook their tears for weakness. We will not make that error again. From the personal records of Supreme Commander Vexnor, Navori Collective.